Welcome to This Week in Christian History, a podcast from the Center for Christian History at Mississippi Christian University. The Center for Christian History is dedicated to expanding knowledge and understanding of Christian history. Our mission is to provide a scholarly, unbiased look at the events, figures, and movements that have shaped Christianity over the centuries. You can visit centerforchristianhistory.com for daily historical highlights, and each week on this podcast, we'll do a deep dive into key moments with Christian history's leading authorities. Our first historical highlight for the week and the subject of our deep dive is Father Walter Ciszek. Born in Pennsylvania to Polish immigrant parents, Ciszek entered the Society of Jesus with the desire to serve in Russia, where militant atheism had become official state policy following the Bolshevik Revolution. Soviet authorities prohibited missionary work, so Ciszek entered the USSR under the guise of being a laborer. On June 23, 1941, one day after Nazi Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union, Ciszek was arrested by the Soviet secret police and accused of being a Vatican spy. He spent 23 years in Soviet labor camps and prisons, and secretly continued his ministry while imprisoned. In 1963, he was released in a prisoner exchange between the USSR and the United States. Our next historical highlight is Alma Bridwell White. White emerged from the holiness movement of the late 19th century, which emphasized personal conversion, holy living, and evangelistic zeal. In 1901, she founded the religious movement that became the Pillar of Fire Church, originally known as the Methodist Pentecostal Union Church. She preached widely, published extensively, established schools, missions, and media outlets, and, in 1918, became the first woman consecrated as a bishop in the U.S. White openly supported the Ku Klux Klan during the 1920s and used denominational publications to promote her views. She died on June 26, 1946, at the age of 84. Our final historical highlight for the week is Cyril Lucaris. Born in Crete in 1572, Lucaris received an extensive education and developed connections with both Eastern and Western Christians. He first served as Patriarch of Alexandria before ascending to the patriarchal throne of Constantinople. His years of leadership unfolded during a period when the Ottoman Empire ruled much of the Orthodox world, and Christian Europe remained divided by the aftershocks of the Protestant Reformation. Lucaris sought to strengthen the Orthodox Church intellectually and institutionally, but his engagement with Protestant theologians proved controversial. In 1629, a confession bearing his name was published that expressed views resembling Calvinist doctrines, including teachings on predestination and justification by faith. Historians continue to debate the extent of Lucaris's personal authorship and beliefs, but the document sparked fierce opposition from both Roman Catholic and Orthodox leaders. Political tensions eventually caught up with the Patriarch. On June 27, 1638, the Ottoman Sultan ordered his arrest and execution, and he was strangled and his body thrown into the Bosphorus. Christians later recovered his remains and provided a proper burial. In 1672, the Synod of Jerusalem formally rejected Calvinist teachings and reaffirmed traditional Orthodox doctrine, effectively repudiating many of the ideas associated with Lucaris, yet his influence endured, especially in efforts to engage with broader Christian scholarship. Today in our deep dive, Nick Walters, founder and director of the Center for Christian History, talks with James Keane about Father Walter Ciszek.
Hello and welcome again to yet another episode of This Week in Christian History, and we are going to focus on Father Walter Ciszek, who is a Jesuit priest who spent a whole heck of a lot of time behind the Iron Curtain before people even started calling it the Iron Curtain, and was a great author and lived a really great life, and so the person who we are pleased to have join us today is Jim Keane, who is the senior editor of America Media, for a long time known as America Magazine, that was a part of the Jesuits, and Father Ciszek was a Jesuit, and so we're glad to learn a heck of a lot more about him today in our conversation. Jim, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Nick. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So talk to us about Walter Ciszek. I mean, he's an American, right? I mean, but of Polish ancestry, is that right?
He was. His parents were immigrants from Poland. They had settled in a kind of coal country of Pennsylvania, outside Scranton, a town called Shenandoah.
Okay.
And grew up there. Kind of a tough kid, actually. If you read
Hmm.
his autobiography, both With God and Russia, or He Leadeth Me, he talks about fighting with being in a gang, fighting with the locals.
Hmm.
But he decided from a fairly young age he did want to be a Catholic priest. The influence of other priests he had met, and then his family was Catholic and religious. And he ended up becoming a Jesuit. At the time the biggest Catholic religious order in the United States, all men. And he went to study. Jesuit formation takes a long time, usually about 12
Okay.
years.
Really?
So he's born in 1904, but he's not really ordained until mid 30s. And then he
You mean
signed
in the
up to
mid night? I'm sorry, his mid 30s or the mid 1930s?
the mid 1930s. He would have
Okay,
been
which is
around
about
30. I don't know exactly how old. He would have been around 30.
okay,
That's usually
okay,
about when, because
okay.
you do a couple years as a novice, a couple years studying philosophy, a couple years working, a couple years studying theology,
Hmm.
then you're ordained. So
Okay.
there's a joke about the Jesuits is that ordination is the reward for a life well lived. But it takes a long time. But anyway, he
Okay.
signed up go basically to Russia eventually. So he was in Rome studying, and he was actually working in Poland as a priest when World War II broke out. And of
Oh,
course, we always think of the Germans invading Poland, but of course, the Soviet Union just took the other half of Poland
right.
as part of the von Ribbentrop Pact. And so he then was behind Russian lines, Soviet lines, and he got some fake papers and was working in secret as a day. His cover was a day laborer, but he was ministering in Russia to some of what Catholics call the Eastern Catholic churches, churches that are in union with the papacy. So they're not Russian Orthodox, but they sometimes more resemble the Orthodox churches in their worship and their
Hmm.
practices.
Okay.
Uh, Got caught in 1941 and was sentenced to hard labor. Was accused of being a spy. Obviously, these trials in the KGB headquarters were not, sort of a foregone conclusion, right?
Right.
Uh, and so they accused him of being a spy. He's found guilty, threatened him with various other things, but in the end, just sentenced him to hard labor, which was in Siberia. So it was no joke, right?
Wow.
Um, so he was in various labor camps in Siberia and no contact at all with the outside world. The last time his family had heard from him was in 1940. So his
Hmm.
family back home just thought he was dead. That,
Hmm.
one of the sides, the Germans, the Soviets, someone had killed him in the war, or the KGB had gotten him after the war. Uh, so he was doing kind of a little bit of like secret ministry in these prison camps, saying mass, hearing confessions, but he was also working alongside the other folks. And
Hmm.
if you read either of his two books, one is called With God in Russia, the other one is He Leadeth Me. He'll talk about the conditions in those camps, the struggle to stay warm, to get hot food,
Hmm.
to kind of live a life of dignity when you're really mistreated at every turn. Uh, Eventually, he does finish out his prison term, but the Soviets say, okay, you can't go home. It's the middle of the Cold War at this point. So you got to stay here. You can live in one of these industrial cities, sort of in Siberia. So, he's not in St. Petersburg or Moscow or something like that. He's in Novosibirsk, places like that. And eventually he's able to get out a letter to his family, 1955, and they smuggle him an overcoat and some other things, but there's no real contact. Nor, I mean, your older listeners might remember this, nor are the Americans really sure that this is actually Walter Ciszek, right?
Hmm.
Because there's all this sort of spy game stuff going on. And so they don't know who they're really talking to. I mean, it could be anyone.
Wow.
So eventually, during the presidency of John F. Kennedy, he exchanges some Soviet spies for a kid who had been accused of spying for the Soviets and then for Ciszek. So it comes home in 1963, and these two Jesuits who had known him as a young man pick him up at what we call Kennedy Airport now, Idlewild then,
Hmm.
and he's kind of unrecognizable to them. They're not sure, is it just 20 years of hard labor that have made him look like this, or is this not really Walter Ciszek?
Mm.
But they had all done their novitiate and their juniorate in the Jesuits, their first couple years of training, out in the middle of Pennsylvania in this town called Wernersville, which had a huge housing for a couple hundred guys, 250 acres with all sorts of ball fields, a swimming hole, a farm, a chapel, a rosary walk, all these things, Mary Grotto. So what they did was they had one of his classmates from when he was been a novice, so when he was 18, drive him there, and then drive around the property, and he would stop and he'd be like, "All right, Walter, what's over the next hill?" Or
Really?
what are we going to see when we turn this corner? Figuring that the Soviets could never find a spy.
Right.
So anyway, so then he starts working in kind of
And so
ecumenical.
he passes the test, right? I
He
mean,
passes.
okay, all right.
He passes, and so he was sort of a celebrity in a way, which I think did not really fit well for him because first of all he was sort of a humble guy, and second of all he had been gone for all these years. The United States in 1963 looks nothing like the place he left in 1938, right?
Right.
And so he started working in ecumenical relations at Fordham, and he started working with this Jesuit who was on staff at America, Dan Flaherty, on writing down what happened to him and his spiritual reflections, but also just the nitty gritty. And they, finally finished their manuscript and they put it all together. And it's 1,500 pages long,
Wow.
right? Which no publisher wants.
Right.
So they boiled it down to a couple hundred. And that eventually came out as With God in Russia.
Okay.
So big, over the years, has been sort of continuously, if not a bestseller, a real spiritual classic. People still read it by today. We still have the copyright to it. And folks over the years have talked about making a movie of it or making a miniseries of it. And then years later in the 70s, he wrote another book called He Leadeth Me, which is more of a spiritual autobiography. I think he told people He Leadeth Me is what the book he really wanted to write, but he had to get all the facts out. And then he also wrote a lot for America Magazine, where I work today.
Oh, okay.
On his reflections on the United States, his reflections on different issues. And he could be pretty harsh because he was very critical of American materialism. He said, the amount of food that gets wasted, or, to see a family give the dog more meat than a person in the Soviet Union would eat, in a week, or, just the sort of food that was thrown away at the end of the meal, because over the years, he had just become so careful about, he'd become an ascetic basically by necessity.
Right.
So he died in 1984. His name has sort of rung out ever since with the Jesuits. So the Jesuit First Studies House in Fordham is Ciszek Hall. And his cause for canonization was open for a number of years with the Altoona Jonestown Diocese, I think it is, in Pennsylvania. And he became sort of a hero to different groups. Sainthood in the Catholic Church, people kind of have their favorites, the patron saint of this, the patron saint of that. And I think he was sort of a patron saint of missionaries, but also a patron saint of prisoners. He would have been. He was not canonized. So many people over the years have just become very sort of captured by this very vivid life and ministry and the toughness of this guy. You feel like when you read it, you feel like you're like he must have looked like Newt Rockney or something, right? So it's a very inspiring story. I wrote about him a couple times for the magazine, and went through our archives to find his old stories. Certainly, I myself, when I was in college, someone gave me With God in Russia to read. So yeah, great, interesting story.
You can watch the rest of Nick's interview with James Keane by clicking the View Full Interviews button on the podcast page of centerforchristianhistory.com. This Week in Christian History is produced for the Center for Christian History by Blue and Gold Media at Mississippi Christian University in cooperation with the MC Department of Communication. For episode transcripts and more information, visit centerforchristianhistory.com. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and follow the Center for Christian History on Facebook and Instagram. Our next podcast episode is coming next week. Thank you for listening.